Mary has graciously joined us today to share her research about the mystical wonder of Aboriginal art and the stories behind them. So please help me welcome Mary Koenig.
Thank you, Deborah. Good afternoon, everybody. Does everyone have a seat who would like to have a seat? I see one right here. This is where you get called upon. It is in the front. And if we need a couple more, John, where are you?
Oh, I'm right here.
Do you have a friend who can pull up an extra seat? I see two people in the back who might be comfortable if they could sit. Okay, there's one right there. I don't want anybody standing. Okay, this is it then. Good afternoon. My name is Mary Koenig. Some of you know my husband, Rodney Koenig. We have been LaGrange part-time residents for close to, 18 years now. We reside in Houston, and I am a part of a women's study group called the Chautauqua Study Club. My presentation today is based on research that I did for that particular organization. It would be a false presentation for me to tell you that I am a complete insider on this topic. I'm not. But I also can learn and like what I'm learning. So I'm going to share with you what I like and what I have learned in the last 7 months. So please accept my humble presentation as also something that I'm pretty enthusiastic about. So here we go. The Aboriginal people have most likely lived in what is now Australia for at least 40,000 years. They may have been there for as long as 100,000 years. That means that they are the oldest continuous human culture on Earth. The art of Aboriginal Australia is the last great tradition of art to be appreciated by the world at large. Despite being one of the longest continuous traditions of art in the world, it remained relatively unknown until the second half of the 20th century. Sometimes art is seen only as ethnographic evidence. In Tasmania, in 1802, the Baudin expedition found a shelter of bark sheets decorated with designs and scratched into their blackened surfaces. The British saw mortuary structures on Melville Island in 1824. Rock art sites were also recorded. These manifestations of Aboriginal culture were not seen as art, however, but only as ethnographic evidence. 19th century attitudes placed Aboriginal Australians on the lowest rung of the evolutionary ladder, and they were regarded as people without art. The first major exhibition to feature Aboriginal art, called Primitive Art, was organized in 1929 by the National Museum of Victoria. In 1941 and 42, Aboriginal art in an artistic contest internationally, touring the United States and Canada. Also in 1941, an exhibition in Sydney featured Aboriginal artifacts along with non-Aboriginal painters and decorative artists. After World War II, the growth of anthropological studies led to a greater appreciation of Aboriginal art. In the 1960s, Indigenous art began to be given widespread mainstream recognition. And this recognition of Indigenous art as aesthetic, not simply cultural artifacts, meant that Europeans reconceptualized ethnographic objects into art. In 2007, Aboriginal artist Clifford Possum Japaljari sold his painting Warlugalong to the National Gallery of Australia for $2.4 million. Born on a cattle station, Clifford worked from late boyhood as a stockman. He began carving in his late teens and had a reputation as a craftsman. His skill, inventiveness, and his enormous enthusiasm for life made him the most celebrated Aboriginal artist of his generation. He received the Order of Australia in 2002. Only 2 months earlier, Emily Kame Kinwari sold her works, Earth Creation, to a private buyer for $1.56 million, a record for any Australian female artist. Emily was born at the beginning of the 20th century and grew up in a remote desert area known as Utopia, 230 kilometers northeast of Alice Springs. Remember that name, you'll hear it again. Distant from the art world that saw her work, she became a member of the Utopia Women's Batik group, using Aboriginal patterns, strong linear designs overlaid with fields of dots. A prolific artist, Emily began to paint late in her life. It is estimated that she produced over 3,000 paintings in the course of her 8-year painting career, an average of 1 painting per day. So, what is Aboriginal art? It seems obvious, and yet Aboriginal art is only considered Aboriginal if it is painted by someone who is of that origin. A non-Indigenous Australian does not have the authority to paint Aboriginal artwork. Aboriginal visual art takes many forms, from the enduring rock engravings and paintings to the more ephemeral arts of body decoration, bark and ground paintings, and ceremonial structures in wood. Traditional shell jewelry was made during Neolithic, using Neolithic tools, including shark's teeth and obsidian. Ritual and utilitarian objects are made from stone, wood, paint, woven fiber, feathers, and turtle shell. The primary focus today will be on painting and fabric art. Art expresses individual and group identity and the relationship between people and the land. Regional variations of visual art abound. In the Northeast Territories Arnhem Land, so I want you to find Northeast and trust that you can read what the map says. But Northeast, okay, that's over there. They painted on flattened sheets of bark, and this is most common, whereas ground paintings are made in the desert. Well, that makes sense, doesn't it? Sandstone carvings can be found in Western Australia. Recent years have witnessed the flourishing of some art forms and the demise of others. In the past, Aboriginal people believed that paintings had special powers. For example, they believed that if they painted fish, well, then they would catch a lot of fish. In addition, only certain groups painted certain animals. Here is a turtle and fish image for you. If a group painted turtles, that's the only thing they painted. They did not paint kangaroos as well. Unfortunately, turtle images that are authentic are hard to find, as opposed to really bad internet craft. The Yorta Yorta tribe from East Victoria paints turtles, as it is also their tribe's totem. They believe that the turtle is their protector and guide. It is often used prominently in visual representations of their creation stories. Meaning in Aboriginal art is elaborated in terms of spiritual power. Since Aboriginal people do not have a written language, art is the means by which the present is connected with the past and also with the supernatural world. By comparison, in Buddhism, the concept of anima mundi is expressed as a soul that does not remain static. It transforms constantly. In the Aboriginal world, religious images and designs, when applied to any surface, have the power to transform the nature of the thing from a mundane state to an extraordinary one, from the profane to the sacred. In ceremony, people's bodies and objects are taken from a dull state to one of brilliance by the application of paint and designs. The concept of soul can also be expressed in art that depicts the relationship between people and the land and individual and group identity. For example, Clifford Possum's granddaughter's art, Women's Creativity. Plato was one of the first to explain the origin of an intangible spirit world, one capable of regulating the life of the entire universe. Long before Plato gave the Western world a soul and turned it into a unique living being, the spiritual life of Aboriginal people centered on something called the dreaming. This was a European term used by Aboriginal people to describe the spiritual, natural, and moral order of the cosmos, similar to Plato's intangible spirit world that unites material and the material and immaterial. The term Jerkkorpa is a word that stands for the dream time, spelled Tjukkurrpa, in case you're taking notes. The period during which the universe and everything was created. It relates to the genesis of the universe, to a time beyond living memory. This is way more than the Big Bang theory, okay? During the dream time, supernatural beings traveled, supposedly, to the then empty universe and created animals, plants, human beings, and geographical landmarks. They also created rules of conduct for humans. Knowledge of the dreamings in Aboriginal culture are more important than ownership of property. Each individual is given custody of specific dreamings, and this is based on family and tribal relationships. The continent of Australia then is covered by an intricate web of dreamings. Some stories that depict these dreamings include rainbow serpents, the lightning men, and the Wagalag sisters. I think I knew them in junior high. They are not nice girls. The stories are allegorical, showing guides for righteous, living laws, including how to act right, social and religious behavior. For example, the rainbow serpent is believed to be one of the oldest continuing religious beliefs in the world. And here's an image of the rainbow serpent. I like this story, so I'll take my time telling it. In Aboriginal mythology, the rainbow snake is an immortal being and creating god. When a rainbow is seen in the sky, it's supposed to be the rainbow serpent traveling from one water hole to another, which is why some water holes never dry up when the drought strikes. Many Aboriginal people in the Kimberley region believe that the rainbow serpent places spirit children throughout the water holes, in which women will become impregnated if they wade in the water. Whoa. The rainbow serpent is a creator, then, of human beings with life-giving powers that send fertility spirits to all the watercourses, such as billabongs, isn't that a great word? Rivers, creeks, and lagoons, as it is in control of producing rainfall. Scientists have found that the first paintings of the rainbow serpent appear in Arnhem Land rock art between 6,000 to 8,000 years ago, after the last ice age, when the seas rose. After much research, it was discovered that the first snake images would have appeared after the rising of the seas due to direct climate change. They now confirm that the prototype or model for these paintings would have been inspired by the ribboned pipefish, which originated from the coast of northern Australia. They came from Shark Bay in Western Australia to the Torres Strait, where there are 242 tiny islands. They would have slowly washed inland by the rising seas after the Ice Age. Indigenous people living inland would have never seen such a creature. This would have been a difficult and stressful time since their lands were being flooded by the rising seas. People from many different tribes would have been forced to share their food and their land. The rainbow serpent, or ribboned pipefish, became a symbol of unity and peaceful cooperation, since the tribes had to work together in order to survive. Where the artist comes from and what culture has informed his or her tribe will depend on what technique can be used. For example, here is a taxonomy. Eileen Napaljari, her skin name, okay, Napaljari. Her language, Pintupi. Her region, Kintore. Where is she from? The Western Desert. And the dreaming that she is allowed to tell. In other words, the stories that are available in her repertoire are from Tiralinga. Kind of like our Tiralinga, not to get mixed up with a great big chili cook-off. Where an artist comes from will inform how the painting will look. For example, dot painting originated from the time of white settlement, when they feared that non-Indigenous people could understand secret knowledge held by Aboriginal people. Dots were first used to hide meaning from white Australians. And image, please. Body paint was also applied, which held meanings connected to sacred rituals. These designs were outlined with circles and then encircled with dots. The original use of dot painting style may have been to create a shimmer effect on a body design. The dots might suggest an energy field or powerful aura around the design. Double dotting obscured any form of meaning, but was still discernible to Aboriginal people. It has now become one of the most well-known style techniques, particularly from the Western Australian tribe Pintupi. Eileen Napaljari, born in 1956, is a Pintupi-speaking Aboriginal Australian artist from the Western Desert region. Eileen began painting for Papunya Tula Artists Cooperative in 1996. She was named as one of Australian Art Collectors magazine's 50 most collectible artists in 2008. Her works are held by the National Gallery of Australia and the Art Gallery of New South Wales. Next image, please. This is an image of the Rockhole and Soakage water site, which depicts designs associated with a famous rock hole situated in the Rocky Hills west of Kintore in the Western Desert, of Central Australia. In ancestral times, a group of men and women traveled east from this site towards the rock hole of the Ililpili. Along the way, they gathered material for the production of various tools used in everyday life. The lines in the painting depict the lengths of wood that are fashioned into a variety of tools. Papunya, a settlement about 240 kilometers northwest of Alice Springs, was one of the first indigenous communities to set up their own art company. There, the Pintupi and Luriga people popularized dot painting 50 years ago, back in the 1970s. Before indigenous art was ever put onto canvas, the Aboriginal people would smooth over the soil to draw sacred designs which belonged to that particular ceremony. And here is an image of a man drawing. Jeffrey Barden was assigned as an art teacher for the children. He noticed that while the Aboriginal men were telling stories, they would draw symbols in the sand. Next slide, please. Then Barden encouraged his students to paint a mural based on the traditional dreamings on the school walls. The murals sparked incredible interest in the community. Encouraged by Barden, soon many of the older men began painting as well. Barden helped them transfer depictions of their stories from desert sand to paint then on canvas. This began the famous Papunya Tula art movement. Each tribe has a cultural heritage that defines and limits the use of artistic techniques. For example, the Koenig nation, which encompasses 5 different tribes, is not allowed to use the dotting technique since it is not in their tribe's culture. But they can use a different technique, such as cross-hatching. I am thinking that perhaps this is similar to when you go to New Mexico, and if you go to buy a Navajo basket is, by golly, going to be made by the Navajo people. It will not be made by the Hopi tribe. They will be making dolls instead. And one tradition says this belongs to our group, our clan. And you're not supposed to borrow that if you are sufficiently close to that community. Now, if you live across the world and you have a fondness for basket making, and you create your own hybrid style, nobody's going to know. But if you're there, it would be considered rude, kind of like Aunt Barbara's rhubarb pie is Aunt Barbara's rhubarb pie. And you probably ought not to bring it to Thanksgiving supper if Aunt Barbara's going to be there. Each tribe has this different cultural heritage. So here we have symbols, and look at them. Are they not fun? I have a friend named Susan who traveled to Australia 20 years ago, and she said that she ate witchetty grubs. Do you see the second line on the far west side? Kind of, crunchy on the outside, juicy on the inside. And somehow it was served with her meal, and it would have been rude to turn it down. Whoa. Big responsibility being a guest at a cookout. Next image, please. Now here we have a fish. In Indigenous Australian art, the technique of cross-hatching has taken on a more structured and stylized appearance. It is used largely by Aboriginal artists of the Northern Territory, particularly in Arnhem Land, where the technique is known as RARK. 2 R's and actually 3 R's, R-A-R-R-K. Aboriginal people also use this technique in the famous X-ray style paintings where the internal organs of animals are depicted. This fine hatching technique of the clan designs is achieved with the marwat, a brush made of human hair in order to create bark. A few strands of human hair, about 3 to 4 centimeters, is bound together with a cotton thread on a carved wooden handle. I'd like you to see the next image of magpie geese and broncos. The marwat is drawn through a slurry of ochre paint and placed strategically on the surface and pushed in a direction away from the artist. The hairs, already straight with the weight of the paint, take the least line of resistance and straighten out perfectly, producing a fine straight line. The process is repeated at regular intervals, and then when this is dry, the same is done in the other direction. Artists use the prescribed palette of the area or the subject and are traditionally painted using alternate fields of red, yellow, black, and white pigments. Artists continue to use this traditional handmade brush as they believe it is the marwat that delivers brilliance, energy, and power to ancestral designs. And now we have our crocodile. Aboriginal people do not have a written language, but each tribe has a different dialect. There are about 500 of them. Therefore, art is the means by which the present is connected with the past and with the supernatural world. It is in the land and in natural species. It is within individuals. It is activated by ceremony and art, and finally expressed through ritual songs, dances, objects, and graphic designs. Painted patterns are derived from ancestral events. A diamond pattern was believed to be burned into the back of the ancestral crocodile. And if I could stand on one foot confidently, I would show you my totally hot boots, which are indeed a crocodile that gave up his life for my feet. Artists need permission you can see them afterwards. Artists need permission to paint a particular story. Individuals inherit through their parents both direct and indirect rights and responsibilities to land, to ceremonies, and to specific dreamings, as well as to their connections to the ancestral world and the supernatural beings that are floating around. Those with direct rights in a ceremony or dreaming, they're called the owners. The rights are derived through patrilineal lineage. Traditional Aboriginal society is organized by a number of systems that structure all life and perceptions. An individual is placed in one of 8 kinship groups. All others are placed in 2 complementary groups called the moieties. Jointly, these affiliations determine a person's conduct in every aspect of social and also religious behavior. Marriage is customarily conducted between members of specific kinship groups belonging to opposite moieties. So no West Virginia jokes. And you know what I'm talking about. They have already figured out that you need some social distancing in order to have healthy children. In art, moiety affiliation plays an important role in determining the subjects. Hence, Aboriginal artists may also map kin or communal relationships. Clans have their own particular markings, highlighting both connectedness and also difference. And paintings show how clan links to which an artist has access, and in many cases, the manner in which they are depicted. Artists cannot paint a story that is not from their lineage, or they should not. Here is an image of the painting that is below here. It's called Milky Way Dreaming, and I'd like to tell you about it. For example, hello, Mr. Crocodile. We can move on to the next
okay.
one. But he's a great-looking crocodile. For example, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders were astronomers, studying the movement of the stars, using them for navigation and the tracking of the seasons. Therefore, paintings about the relationship with the sky are from this kinship group. Here is a painting I discovered at Nana Booker's gallery in Houston. Paddy Japaljari Sims, one of the most famous Walpiri painters, was born 1917 at Kunajare, southwest of Yundumu, at a site where a number of dreaming tracks or stories interconnect. Paddy lived a traditional farming life in his ancestral country. He hunted kangaroo, emu, and other bush tucker, and passed on his hunting knowledge to generations of young men. This led him to teaching Walpiri Yukpura dreamings at the Yundumu school. In the early 1980s, Paddy was one of a handful of Walpiri elders who collaborated on painting the school doors. These actual door paintings provided a catalyst for the men to make paintings for the outside world. He also became one of the most knowledgeable keepers and painters of the nighttime dreaming stories. The absence of ambient light in the Australian desert allows extraordinary viewing of the stars. So Aboriginal people have long studied and handed down myths about stars and constellations. I drove down the road to Austin not too long ago, and my husband and I looked up at the sky and we gasped, because what did we think we see? What did we think we saw? Jupiter. And there it was. And when we got to our hotel, one of the young men who was serving us snacks and a drink had an app on his phone, and he could check, and he says, yep, Jupiter. We were so proud to be able to see that. There were no stars in the sky, nothing except Jupiter. Gave me goosebumps. So, Paddy Sims' paintings have been included in numerous exhibitions in Australia, Europe, and the United States, and hang in prominent institutional and private homes, including mine. This is his painting, Milky Way Dreaming, and I am feeling smug. Okay, Aboriginal paintings are often maps of traditional land. Some artwork can be read as a topographical map where features of the landscape are symbolically represented. Such artworks may map spiritual significance rather than the landscape features. Proportions may be skewed, distances not to scale, and perceptive disregarded. Height, width, and relative distance may also have been deliberately distorted, much like Picasso's cubed paintings, as he tried to show several different aspects of the subject simultaneously. Another factor in distorted perspective could be expected since there was no conventional compass orientation. A second painting from Nana Booker's gallery illustrates the land as seen from an aerial perspective. Image? Priscilla Napel-Horan Hebert was born in 1977 in Alice Springs, in Australia's Northern Territory. She and her mother lived in Arayunga, a small town located 140 miles west, again, of Alice Springs. After grade school, she attended an Aboriginal boarding school. And I want you to listen carefully to the name of the area that they called this school. in just a second. Priscilla married Louis Moneymoon and has been painting with the Walkalura Artists Aboriginal Corporation, an Aboriginal-owned and governed art center located in Yundumo since 2010. Her traditional country is the Tanami Desert on the Tanami Down Station, until recently known as Mongrel Downs Station. Now I want you to think about that for just a minute. Mongrel Downs, located 435 miles northwest of Alice Springs. So Alice Springs is a point from which you measure other distances. Her grandparents, her father and her brothers, also lived on Mongrel Downs, with one uncle, the spokesman for the group, claiming traditional Aboriginal ownership of the land. Priscilla paints her father's Yukpura, native seed dreaming, and Lukara Yukpura, desert fringe rush dreaming. Both stories which relate directly to her ancestral country and its flora and fauna. Priscilla's painting is actually a bird's eye view of her ancestral country, with its abundant fringe rush grasses. Concentric circles linked by lines could mean water holes connected by running water. When I visited this painting at Nana Booker's gallery, Ms. Booker said to me, you know, there have been aerial photographers who fly over the land, who then notice the land and then notice her painting and say, it is an almost identical construct. In other words, what she was able to do in pigment on canvas is what one can see from the sky. I don't know how she did that. Painting is also a legal narrative. Now this is important for the lawyers in this group. The Ngaro native title determination was the largest claim in the Kimberley region and recognized exclusive possession of native title, incorporating over 76,000 square kilometers of land. Ngura means home. There is an image next. This great sandy desert painting is an example of how painting is a legal narrative. And let me explain. It is the largest example of Western desert art painted by over 60,000 artists from the South Kimberley region at Pirnini. The canvas is colossal, measuring 26 by 33 feet. It's made of 10 colorful, harmonized patchworks, each denoting a different story. It shows, if one knows how to look, water holes, trees, salt lakes, the path of serpents and ancestors. It depicts a panorama of ceremonies being performed, creation stories, and even snoring fathers. You have to look really hard. Okay, now I'm going to talk about bark art. Traditionally, painting was done on bark used to build shelters. Today, bark art is used as canvas. Image. The bark is cut from the stringy bark tree, a kind of eucalyptus, immediately after the wet season when it is still moist. The bark has got to be in good condition, free from splits, knots, and not eaten by termites. It is cut off in rectangular pieces and then flattened. The bark is prepared by placing a wet sheet on the heat of hot coals without directly touching them, and then pressing it flat with the rough side, not the side to be painted, having contact with the heat. This process also removes the moisture from the bark. Weights are then placed on the bark for several days in order to flatten it further. Bark painting uses red, yellow, white, and black, colors that come from the soils. Red and yellow come from iron oxide ochre. White comes from gypsum, and black comes from charcoal or from manganese ore. The pigments were traditionally mixed with water and fixed with resins from trees. Today, artists also paint with acrylics. And here's an image of rock art. Art carvings found in the Northern Territory's Arnhem Land dates back beyond 35,000 years. No, that's not correct. Between 15,000 and 35,000 years. Okay. These paintings antedate the Paleolithic rock paintings of Altamira and Lascaux in Europe. Today, Australia, evidence of rock art exists across the country in urban areas around Sydney Harbour and at Bondi, and remote areas including Western Australia and the Kimberley region, the site of the oldest evidence of rock art near Windjana National Park. Ochre was used to paint on the rock surface. Art was created as oil paintings or by using stencils. In stencil art, a hand was placed on the rock surface and ochre was sprayed from the mouth like that, okay? Leaving an outline on the rock surface. The ochre created a chemical reaction with the rock sinking into it. Usually these were on surfaces protected from the elements. Paleolithic pigments varied depending on what mineral oxides were available. Iron oxide produced a wide range of shades from bright red, from chestnut to darker brown, while manganese oxides provided the darker colors from blues to black. Iron carbonates yielded the yellows and vermilions. Carbon dating confirms that the greatest variety of different colors belong to the most recent period, around, get this for recent, 10,000 BC. The most common representations were animals and hunting scenes. We can also see the evolution of human figures. Matchstick men, for example. We have an image. An individual artist to whom a work is attributed will be the owner of that subject. Ownership of the designs is akin to copyright over them. The use of designs belonging to others without the appropriate permission constitutes a major breach of Aboriginal law. In traditional societies, the regulations which apply to the ownership of and rights to land and dreamings are carried over into the making of art for public domain. This issue assumes greater significance in a world where the designs are broadcast much more widely than ever before. In 1976, a non-profit organization, the Aboriginal Artists Agency, was established as an Aboriginal copyright collection and advocacy group. Most advocacy agencies are funded by the government. They fulfill promotion and support roles with varying degrees of success. This is complicated since the artists come from different geographic areas and have different interests, with a preponderance of artists coming from remote locations. Here's our next image and an interesting story, I think. I'd like to talk to you about art fraud. The case of Eddie Burrup or Elizabeth Durrock. Big money has been made from the sale of Indigenous art, and disappointingly, but not surprisingly, an illegal business has developed. Some art is sold as having been painted by Indigenous artists when it's not. This not only cheats the buyer, but also causes offense to Indigenous people whose cultural heritage has been appropriated. For example, Australian artist of non-Aboriginal descent, Elizabeth Durack, painted a series of paintings and exhibited under the name of Eddie Burrup. She created a profile for him as an Aboriginal man. 2 of these paintings were selected for inclusion for specific awards. Durack confessed that the paintings were hers in March of 1997 in that issue of Art Monthly. She defended her actions by claiming that she chose Burrup as her medium, inspired by her life experience, and that he was a synthesis of several Aboriginal men she had known. Not surprisingly, her actions outraged the Indigenous community. So, cultural discourse leads to cultural appropriation. So when is it okay to raid the cultural icebox? Who owns the dots and the circles and the turtle images? Whose story is it? The teller or the interpreter? Here are a few examples of famous artists who may or may not have been influenced by Aboriginal art. When should we say that X is derivative of Y? Think about the potential for conscious or unconscious hybridization of style and technique. Here is an image of a gentleman you might know. His name is Chuck Close. Dots and circles. So here you go. Chuck Close, well known. This image is called Cindy 2, 1988. This work by Chuck Close uses patterns we have seen in Pintupi dot and circle art. Next image, Keith Haring, born in Pennsylvania, 1958. His ink drawing, untitled, depicts stick figures ready to move, reminiscent of ancient rock art paintings. Next image, Ian Fairweather. Now here's a real problem for deciding who this man belongs to. He's born in Scotland, considered, though, an Australian painter. Because he lived a peripatetic life, Fairweather's art demonstrates a hybridization of his cultural worlds. He was influenced by Chinese traditional art, lived all over the world, an eccentric loner, sailed from Darwin to Indonesia on a homemade craft, settled on Bribie Island in northern Australia, died 1974. Although few of his works have an Australian theme, he is considered to be a member of the Australian school. I include it as an example of the multiple influences a painter might have absorbed, knowingly and unknowingly. Look at this title. This painting is called Qian Tiang Drunk, Carried Home. I like the title a lot. Today, there are native Australian painters working in traditional and conventional Western materials, such as pigments, oils, and acrylics on canvas to produce stunning visual effects. Image. Minnie Pearl was born in 1915 in, here it is, Utopia, Northern Territory, on a cattle station, 300 kilometers northeast of Alice Springs. She painted on canvas using pigments and acrylic. Minnie's emergence and dominance in the world of contemporary art have been compared to her sister-in-law, the legendary Emily Kane Kinvare, who, like Minnie, began her painting career in her mid-70s and continued to paint with an energy that belied her age. Another image. The artist main dreamings are women's dreamings, stories depicted for and by women. Bushmelon and bushmelon seed, for example. These convey her love and respect for the land and the food it provides to the people. Minnie and the other women used to collect this fruit, green in color, ripening to a brown color. They would scrape out the small black seeds. Then they would eat the fruit immediately or cut it into small pieces, which were skewered and dried, ready to be eaten in the coming months when bush tucker was scarce. Bushmelon is depicted using a linear design of curves, circles, and even breast designs of different colors, with a very loose and bold design. Minnie Pearl exhibited her works extensively throughout Australia and the world with great success, and is regarded as one of Utopia's foremost artists, and her paintings continue to be in demand. Minnie was nominated as one of the 50 most collectible Australian artists and has had solo exhibitions. Her first was in 2000 in Melbourne, and again September 2002 in Sydney. In conclusion, people are now paying attention to an under-acknowledged cultural world. Today, Aboriginal artists can be found from Derby in Western Australia to the remote tip of Cape York Peninsula and in the major cities of Australia. Aboriginal art and culture are not merely a window into some tribal past. It's about how people remember the past and think about the future, and the ways they identify with others like themselves, in distinction from others who are not like themselves. Women and their artistic sensibilities provide one bridge to the appreciation of hitherto unrecognized aesthetic forms. In just a few short decades, the world's oldest living culture has converted its ancestral traditions and ephemeral art forms into a movement which now attracts art collectors, critics, and museum curators from all around the world. In Utopia in the late 1970s, teachers demonstrated batik and taught a group of women how to do the traditional Indonesian fabric painting with wax resists, and dyes. You can see some of them hanging right here. And if you're in the first row, I invite you, since you're in the first row and printed, to come and take a piece of fabric from this box. And I just want you to hold it. It's okay, just hold it and, enjoy it. Here you go. Just give it a feel. Yeah, I mean, because it's hanging up. And why don't you pass this to the friends in the next row? And this, oh no, that's okay, this lesson. So what I've done is I had the identifying marker on these fabrics sewn onto one piece with a little bit of fringe showing. By the way, this is an awfully nice crocodile box. You know you want it. Yes, exactly. So, feel it, look at the tab on it. All of these are from M&S Textiles. And who has, I'm actually taking some time with this, so you could put on the light right now. I think that might help. Let me see a little better. There, because you want to see it a little better. Okay, who has dancing spirit? You've got dancing spirit. It's nice, isn't it? Who has Kingfisher Camp?
Oh, I love the dots. Oh,
Anybody got Kingfisher Camp
I've seen this.
by
Oh,
Nimble?
that's that one.
Okay. Kingfisher Camp by the river. How about Kangaroo Path? Okay. Nice. Roseanne Morton. Now her name is not Australian. Well, I take that back. Her name is not the name of what we would associate with an Aboriginal artist. So I don't know the backstory. How about Carning Ground by Charlie Egan? He's the only guy. Okay, the orange. How about Onion Dreaming? I do so like the idea of onion dreaming. I mean, onions should dream, I think. How about Wildflowers Dreaming? Good. How about Yonkie by June Smith? Look at the fringe. I mean, these are all beautiful and gorgeous display here, all of which will be available to you at the very short walk to the checkout counter. But I have just a few more thoughts in conclusion. Okay, back to the philosophy of all of this. How many of you remember Joseph Campbell when you were a student?
Joseph
I
Campbell?
bet you do. Yes, something about dreams.
Yeah.
Thank you, Joshua, for raising your hand bravely. Okay, philosophers look for patterns of belief that sustain society. Joseph Campbell, the American scholar of myth, maintains that myth is the secret opening through which the inexhaustible energies of the cosmos pour into cultural manifestations. Without a written language to communicate, Aboriginal artwork depicts this cosmology as a visual story where dreaming's blistered sleep. I'd love to claim that as my own, but it's Joseph Campbell. From the impermanence of stories drawn on the desert floor to the permanence of stories told on a museum wall or on a loom, artists, I think, live in the inner elbow of that belief, carrying the water, the brushes, the pigment, and the paint. The end.
Bravo!
Thank you, Mary. We are what a treat to have you here with us today. Again, thank you so much for joining us today. You are in no rush. You're not being pushed out the door. Feel free to take a look again at the exhibits while you're here. Visit us in the museum store. Joanne and Lauren and Lori, everybody's here. John's here. We're all here to help you. And thanks again for joining us today.
And if you don't mind, I would like the fabrics back.